Recently on July 6th and 7th, 2021, I was finally able to make my much-awaited first visit to Six Flags Great Adventure, and even with El Toro being closed, it was still a phenomenal experience, and I can tell you that as soon as Toro reopens, I will immediately be revisiting the park. It's not a perfect park, a lot of the staff seemed like they didn't really want to be there and were sometimes even pretty rude, but no park is really perfect. I overall had an incredible time, and it ranks as my 5th favorite park I've been to behind Cedar Point, Hershey Park, Islands of Adventure, and Six Flags Great America. In this video, I'll be recapping both the days I had at the park as well as giving my brief thoughts on all the rides. Before we get started though, I do want to mention two things. First of all, I don't take footage when I'm at parks because I do not at the moment have a good enough camera that would make getting footage worthwhile, so I'll be using non-copyright footage graciously uploaded by people like Canopy Coaster and Airtime Thrills. So if I'm describing a part of my day and that doesn't match up with the footage on the screen, that's why. And also, I'll be covering 2 full days in this video, and I don't want this video to be super long, so I'm probably going to be speeding through some stuff. This might be a somewhat scattershot video, but I'll do the best I can. So as I live in Maryland and we were driving in the park the same day of our visit, we started the day bright and early and ended up leaving the house around 7 AM to get to the park right around opening. We got there around 30 minutes after opening, so not too bad at all. I still had a potential of up to 10.5 hours there. Our first stop was Kingda Ka because it is the tallest and fastest coaster in North America, and so I figured it probably could get some long lines. The line wasn't bad at all, maybe 10 to 15 minutes. Kingda Ka was absolutely phenomenal. I know a lot of people say the Dragster is so much better, and I think that Dragster is a little bit better, but it is very close. Kingda Ka has the more powerful launch, and it has a hill at the end that despite what people say about it, I still got some sustained floater on. Next up, because we were right there and still had time left on our locker, was Zumanjaro. Despite being slightly depressed walking to the ride by getting amazing views of that one wooden coaster we weren't going to be able to ride, Zumanjaro has easily become my new favorite drop tower. It has almost the exact same restraints as Skyrush, so you feel so free while you're up there 400 feet in the air, and it feels like the drop lasts forever, as you might expect. Next, we were thinking about hitting Superman and Green Lantern because their ride types usually attract pretty long and slow lines. Superman was closed, so we got into Green Lantern's massive line, but maybe 30 seconds after we entered the line, it was announced that the ride had broken down, a theme that would follow both of our days. So we just decided to come back to it later. I was still in the mood to ride a B&M looping coaster, so we just headed over to Bizarro, which was a walk-on. The lines at this park are really weird because half the rides had long lines and half were walk-ons for some reason. Riding in the second to back row, Bizarro was definitely better than I was expecting. I was expecting it to be a little bit rough, but it was completely smooth, no headbanging at all, and all the effects like the mist, fire, and sound effects were working. It's just a really fun sequence of elements, even if it isn't the most forceful thing ever. Naturally, since it was right down the pathway, our next stop was Runaway Mine Train. I decided to ride row 3 because that's the magic seat on Magnum, and Runaway Mine Train has some similarly shaped airtime hills. There wasn't really any airtime though through most of the ride, it was just a fun little journey over the lake/river thing. But when we hit that last hill, I was absolutely launched with some crazy ejector airtime. That was definitely because of the weird shaping of the hill. At this point, it was probably around 12 or 12:30, and we ate breakfast real early, so it was time for lunch. My dad and sister got gyros from this Greek food stand, but wanting to deprive myself of the possibility of consuming Six Flags' attempt at foreign food, I went with the safe option and a slice of cheese pizza, which was quite good. Now, after devouring greasy Six Flags food, I figured the only sensible option was to ride the most nauseating ride in the park, Joker. I still have no idea what to think about Joker because the actual ride was incredible for the first 15 seconds. We were flipping so much, I got crazy hang time and airtime in every direction and was so out of control. But by the time I hit the brakes, I felt absolutely terrible, maybe the most nauseous I've ever felt after a ride. And I was also feeling the effect of the ride pummeling the area down under the equator. So I absolutely loved the ride, but I hated it at the same time. Sort of like the new Space Jam movie. The next up, as it's literally right next to Joker, was Harley Quinn Crazy Train, the large Zero Tivoli that opened in 1999, and I can only assume hasn't been repainted since then. Jokes aside, Harley Quinn was surprisingly actually a really fun and enjoyable ride that was extremely smooth, and even provided some pretty great laterals, especially on the 2 turns at the end of the ride. It's honestly one of my favorite family coasters. After that, we moved on to the worst family coaster in the park, and well, just the worst coaster in the park in general, Skull Mountain. I do not really understand the height this ride gets at all. People always say that the first drop gives crazy ejector airtime. I rode in the very back row, and it was at best a tiny pop and mild floater. I also thought that it'd be an air-conditioned themed ride, but instead I just found myself meandering around a burning hot warehouse with zero theming at all. I will say that it's an extremely smooth ride, but that's all I really have good to say about Skull Mountain, I'm sorry. Well, after that disappointment, we figured Jersey Devil would be a good idea. It was running, but then when I got to the entrance, a worker said that the ride was down, even though it was going with people on it, so that's interesting. Anyways, now the heat index had reached 104 degrees and the rapids were right there. It had a pretty long line, maybe the longest of the day, but when it's as hot as it was, we didn't really care, and it would work out because Jersey Devil would probably be back open when we were done. The rapids were decent, there were some cool rocks, but it felt pretty short. Funny thing was that every single person on the rapids got soaked except me. I did not get a single drop of water. As we expected, Jersey Devil had quote-unquote reopened by then, and we got in line expecting a long wait as much of the queue was filled, but that line moved ridiculously fast with 4 train ops, and it ended up being maybe 10 minutes. Here though, we encountered probably the rudest park employee I've ever seen. Like, if I could, I would have fired her on the spot. She was sitting in her little air-conditioned Jersey Devil operators building, and the loading for this ride is weird. You have to put your restraints down one at a time in order, and they don't explain this, and if you put down your restraint at the wrong time, which half the people did because the loading makes no sense, she would scream her head off at you, and at one point even said to stop being a bunch of idiots. I don't mean to sound like a Karen, but that's kinda ridiculous and unacceptable. However, the ride easily made up for it. I was assigned very front row, and I loved the sequence of elements, the standout being the zero-G stall. Plus, I got great ejector airtime throughout the whole thing, even on the hills at the end. I just wish that the trains weren't so uncomfortable though, because that did take away quite a bit. Next up was Nitro, and my expectations weren't very high for the ride, and it was certainly better than I was expecting. I got some decent bloater airtime on every single hill, and the setting was amazing, and the helix is so much more intense than I was expecting. I grayed out and almost blacked out on every single one of my rides. It's a mid to low tier B&M Hyper probably, but it's still an extremely fun ride. At this point, my dad and sister were worn out from the extreme heat, so they decided to go back to the car for a break. I was burning up too, but I still need my good credits, so of course I stayed back in the park. At this point, I started a pattern that I would do, which basically was ride a coaster, go get a free cup of water and devour it in 3 seconds, sit down for a minute or two in the shade, ride a coaster, get water, devour, break. Yeah, pretty much just like that repeated. After Nitro, the most obvious thing to do would probably be Batman the Ride, but the thought of Dark Knight Coaster's air conditioning drew me over there instead. Dark Knight was certainly a very good Wild Mouse. I love the theming that had, especially in the first half and in the station. It's my second favorite Wild Mouse behind the masterpiece that is Raging Cajun. My next stop now is Batman the Ride, and what the hell were you thinking with this Q-Line Great Adventure? Basically, you're standing in a metal oven, so when I finally got to the station, I was about as wet as a drowned badger. The ride though was phenomenal, so intense, and it never let up until the very end. It was completely smooth too, and definitely one of the best paced coasters I've ever ridden. Much better than I remember the St. Louis Batman being. At this point, the only 2 operating credits I had left to get were Superman and Green Lantern, so I made the trek over to that side of the park to find that both of them had reopened. I was hoping that Superman would be a bit better than I remembered the Great America one being, but nope, they were pretty much exactly the same. One fantastic element and then really nothing after that. They're still solid rides, but definitely some of the more overrated rides I've ridden. Green Lantern on the other hand surprised me, and it turned out to be an extremely enjoyable ride. It was my first stand-up, and the ride felt like it kept getting more and more intense as it went on because you were getting worn out by the riding position in this weird way. It was like nothing I've ever experienced, but it was a ton of fun. There was a bit of headbanging, but I just kept my head forward and had no issues. With all the credits complete, I was next gonna go re-ride King to Ka, then go meet back up with my family, but Ka broke down right when I got there. I got back to my family around 7:05 p.m. and we spent a good while wandering around looking for some place to get food, but for some reason almost all of Great Adventure's food stands close at 7 p.m, which makes literally no sense when the park closes at 9 p.m, but whatever. We realized that a storm was moving fast, so we decided that we'd get one more ride on Nitro and then we'd dip. That ride was really cool because you could see a ton of lightning in the distance. I'm surprised they hadn't shut the ride down yet for lightning, but then again I'm not surprised because it is a Great Adventure. This ride also felt really weird because it was still super hot out, but then you would hit these random cold pockets of air from the storm moving in. One of the more unique feelings I've gotten on a coaster. Then we were out of there and back to our hotel, and right at that point the sky opened up and completely pooped itself. Like, I'm not even joking, the rain was brown. It's New Jersey though, so what do you expect? So that was day 1. It didn't go completely as planned, but it was still an awesome time. Now for day 2, I'm pretty much just going to tell you how many times I rode each ride that I did that day, and how it compared to my first rides as to not drag out the video so long. First of all, Jersey Devil was down the whole second day, and it was actually closed for a good week and a half afterwards, so while I wish I rode it more than once the first day, I'm happy to at least have gone on it at all. Nitro I was originally planning on riding first, but was taking forever to open, so my first 2 rides were on Batman the Ride, which is somehow even better and more intense than day 1, which I don't really understand because these were morning rides, but like I said before, it's Great Adventure. Nothing makes sense here. Once Nitro did reopen, we got on the first train of the day front row. Especially for the first ride of the day, the ride was moving phenomenally, but then it stopped on the mid-course for like 15 minutes in the baking sun. It did reopen later in the day though, and I got 4 rides on it that day. I got a ride on Skyride, which is cool and moved very fast for a Skyride. Got another ride on Bizarro, which is good, but definitely not as good as my first ride because I rode in the front of the train this time and it was a bit rougher and less forceful. Definitely a back row ride for me. King to Kai got 3 more rides on, one of which was randomly extremely rough, but the other 2 were completely smooth and just as good as I remember the ride being. I got 1 more ride on Runaway Mine Train. I tried back row this time, which was better because I got airtime on almost all the hills as opposed to just the one. I got another ride on Harley Quinn Crazy Train, which might sound like a waste of time, but it's honestly just such a fun ride that it's a really nice breather ride because it's pretty tame still. I got another ride on Dark Knight Coaster, which was maybe a tad worse because I was expecting the jump scare at the end this time, but it was still a great wild mouse. Got 2 rides on Justice League Battle for Metropolis, which I'm pretty sure I suck at, but that's okay because the air conditioning is nice. My highest score was 95,000. And finally, I got a ride on Cyborg Cyberspin, which is actually surprisingly really fun because it was quite out of control, there was some great hang time, and the foot choppers were great, and the shorter ride cycle kept me from getting very sick. So that was all the rides I got. In the end, my ride count for both days was 6 on Nitro, 4 on King to Ka, 1 on Green Lantern, 1 on Superman Ultimate Flight, 1 on Skull Mountain, 2 on Bizarro, 2 on Runaway Mine Train, 2 on Harley Quinn Crazy Train, 1 on Joker, 5 on Batman the Ride, 1 on Jersey Devil, 2 on Dark Knight, 2 on Justice League, 1 on Cyborg, 1 on Skyride, 1 on Congo Rapids, 2 on Zumanjaro, and a big ol' goose egg on El Toro. I wanted to get a ride on Houdini and another one on Green Lantern, but I ended up running out of time. In the end, Great Adventure is certainly not a perfect park, but like I mentioned at the start of the video, it's still an amazing experience every enthusiast needs to get out to, as they have so many amazing rides of both the coaster and non-coaster variety. I will certainly be making my way back as soon as I can once El Toro reopens. So that's about all I have. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like or maybe even subscribe. That's the best way to fight against the YouTube algorithm. Also leave any suggestions, thoughts, or video ideas down in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys later. See ya.